The last GUI related topic we're going to discuss is that of dialog boxes. Now, this is the first GUI component that's actually a little bit different from the ones we've seen before. It's a little bit simpler in that it doesn't follow the same structure of an event source, an event object, and event listener. So it actually doesn't use that same process that we've been saying all along all of the GUI components use, because it's really different. It's not really a GUI component per se, but it is part of what you might use in creating a graphical interactive program with your user. So I do cover it within this set of videos, but note that it's very different from the other types of components that we've learned about. So a dialog box is basically a pop-up window, and dialog boxes are used to either convey information to the user, confirm some action that the user takes, allow the user to enter in a little bit of data, or allow the user to choose a file or a color, something like that. But dialog boxes are different because they usually have a very short, single, specific purpose. So usually they pop up, they do something with the user, and then they go away. So they're not really usually a lasting part of your overall program. They're usually, again, just these sort of brief interactions with the user. So because of that, that's kind of why they're structured a little bit differently. They're not, again, going to be built in to your full program to always be there. You know, a button's always going to be there, or a text field's always going to be there. They're kind of just these little brief interactions. Okay, so they are a little bit different. And again, you can think about them kind of like a pop-up window. Now, Java gives us lots of different classes to create dialog boxes. We're only going to talk about one, JOption pane. But for those of you who are interested in going a little bit further, there is a JFile Chooser class, which allows you to pop up a window, that lets a user select a file either for upload or for download. There's a Color Chooser class that will pop up like a little color map, allowing the user to select a color. So there's lots of other types of dialog boxes, but we're only going to talk about one, and that's JOption pane. So the JOption pane provides three different static methods to create three different types of dialog boxes. So the simplest is a message, and this type of box basically just displays a message to the user. So we invoke this type by saying JOption pane.showMessageDialog, and then into that static method we send two parameters, the parent and the message. This message is typically just a string, but it could also be an image file, for example, if you wanted to display that as a pop-up. Typically for the parent, you send in either null or this, and I'll show you the difference between those two when we look at an example. So again, this is sort of the most basic. It's just a little pop-up window that's going to show up, show your message. The user clicks OK to get rid of it and moves on with the rest of your program. Now, the other thing that's different about JOption pane and dialog boxes in general in Java is that they are part of the regular flow of control. So wherever this line of code shows up, that's when the pop-up's going to happen. Okay, so that's different again from our other actions that we've talked about, where it's sort of behind the scenes. The code's just hanging out until a button is clicked or until a mouse is moved. This code is different. It actually, again, takes place as part of the standard flow of control. Okay, so message is your simplest type. Another type is input. This allows you to ask the user for a single line of input. So to invoke this pop-up, we say JOption pane.showInputDialog. We again send a parent, usually either null or this. And again, we send a message. This will be the text that's displayed on top of the text input box. Could also be an image, though, if you wanted an image displayed. This method will return a string. So again, if you're asking the user for a number, you'll need to convert that from a string into an integer. The last kind of dialog box is a confirmation, and this basically is a little pop-up window that has a yes, no, or cancel button. So if you want to, ask the user, are you sure you want to take that action? Are you sure you want to close that window? Or whatever it is, you can use the show confirm dialog method. And again, send in a parent and a message. Now, this method will return an integer. If you want to know what button the user clicked, you can compare that integer to these two constants, JOption pane.yesOption or JOption pane.noOption, and that allows you to determine whether the user clicked yes or the user clicked no. So we're going to look at just a couple examples. The first one is going to be kind of a program that just runs solely with dialog boxes, just so you can kind of see an example of how they work. And then we'll also use some dialog boxes added to an existing program. So first up, we're going to write a program that uses dialog boxes to get two integer values from the user. And then we will display the sum and product and then ask the user if they want to repeat that process. Okay? So I'm going to create a new class, call it math pop-up. And again, this is a little bit different. I'm not, for this particular program, I'm not using my GUI templates, I'm really creating a larger GUI program. I'm just going to actually have a main method. And the dialog boxes will show up as soon as I reach that line of code. So I'm just going to put a simple print outline here so you can take a look at what I mean. So that'll print first, and then after that, we're going to ask the user to enter in two numbers. So if we need information from a user, we use the show input dialog method. So I can say jOptionPane.show input dialog, and I'm going to start with null, and I'll show you what this looks like in a minute. And my message is going to be enter the first number. Okay. This is part of the javax.swing package, so you do need to import that. Now this will return a string, so I can store that in user string 1, and then I can convert that to user number. Integer.parseInt user string 1. So I'm just going to run this just so you can see what the pop-up looks like. So there we go, it looks like that. Enter the first number, and if I put in a number, it's going and click OK, the dialog box is going to go away. You can see that the rest of my code went here. You'll also notice, let me put a print line here. You'll notice that ending is not displayed because once we reach this line of the code, the J option pane, that sort of freezes the rest of the program. So the program's now waiting for the user to interact with this pop-up window and dismiss it, and however they're going to dismiss it before it moves on. Okay, so the program is going to be stalled at this line here until I interact with it again and then move on. Oops, I lost it. There it is. Okay. Okay, so that's another thing that's a little bit different, is that just like any other line of code, like if this was a line of code asking the user for input from a scanner object, for example, it would wait. The program would pause until the user types something in. Same rules apply for a J option pane. Okay, so we're gonna do this again to get the second user number rather. Get the second number. Then we're going to get the sum. And the product. And then we're going to display them back to the user. And if you're just displaying information, you can use the show message dialog. So that one doesn't return anything. The sum is sum, and the product is product. Okay, so if I run this now, first number is 12, second number is 13, sum is 24, product is 144. Only when I click this final OK in the message dialog does the program move on to printing the output ending. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at the last example of a type, which is the confirmation show confirm dialog. So that is going to return an integer to us, the user choice, and that's J option pane.show confirm dialog. Do you want to enter another set of, and I'll say another pair of numbers? And that'll return to us an integer. So then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put this whole thing inside of a loop. Run math. So while we want to run the math, we'll do all of this stuff. And then down here, we'll say if the user choice is equal to J option pane.yes option, run the math is true. Otherwise, run the math is false, and that will break us out of our loop. Okay, so here we go. We can put in a 12 out of 5. There's the sum, there's the product. And now it says, do you want to enter another pair? And it gives me the yes, no, cancel option. So if I click yes, okay, there's the first, there's the second, sum and the product. Okay, do you want to enter another pair? When I click no, it just ends. Okay. So again, that's an example of how these pop-up windows work, as well as talking about how they operate with the rest of the code. So they sort of operate back in our standard, regular, non-GUI mindset where we're going line by line by line, and while we're waiting for one line to finish, we don't move forward with other lines. So while we're waiting for the user to interact, oops, there's a little bug right there. That should have been user string too. While we're waiting for the user to interact with this dialog box, this pop-up window, the whole system pauses and waits for that interaction before moving on. So let's take a look at one other example, and this is, we're going to go back to our drawing circles program. So that was this program here, the one with the separate control panel where we drew 50 circles, and then we said they were filled or black and white or color or unfilled, and we can redraw. Well, in this program, we hard-coded in a constant to say how many circles we want, but I'm going to modify this now so that it uses a J option pane. Okay, so I'm actually going to create a new class so we keep this one existing for reference. Okay, so this is going to be my random circles J option class. Just change the name of my class, my constructor, and make sure in my main method I am not creating just a random circles as my panel, but creating a random circles J option as my panel. Oh, and I'll also need to change my other class too. And I'm going to pause this so I can also change the other classes real quick to create a copy. Okay, sorry about that. I had to also modify the random circles control panel J option class too. So I just changed the names of the classes so we have a separate copy. Didn't make any other changes. So again, this is what that program looks like. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to use a J option pane to get the number of circles from the user rather than hard coding it. So in order to support that, I'm going to need the constructor to take in that number. So I'm going to get rid of my constant here, and I'm going to create a numCircle variable. I'm then going to take that variable into the constructor. And of course, I'll also need to use that variable inside of my paint component. Okay. So now how do I set that number? Well, I can go down to my main method. Of course, I need to put a number in here. So the main method is the method that runs, right? That's where we create our frame, we set the size, we create our panel. So before we create our panel, we're going to put in here a J option pane dot show input dialog, enter the number of circles. And that, of course, will return a string, but we can parse the integer that we return. We can parse that string that's returned. Sorry, it's jumping around here on me. Into an integer. Now, I'm not dealing with the possibility that the user might enter in bad data, so they might enter in hello instead of 50. I'm going to leave that for another time. That's a little bit outside the scope of this video, but just be aware that this doesn't account for that. So if that situation happens and you're trying to parse that hello string into an integer, you are going to get an exception. Okay, so now when we run our program, the very first thing that happens, enter the number of circles, is this line here, this one here, and the program is frozen there. So the rest of the panels haven't been shown yet. The frame has not yet been set visible to true, right? Because we're waiting, we're paused, we're frozen on this particular line. So we'll start with 100, and there we go. There's 100 circles. Or we could say, no, let's keep it a little simpler. Let's draw 10. And there's our 10 circles. They go a little off the visible space. Okay, so here's an example of how you can use the J option pane mixed in with other GUI programs or any other kind of program. You can always put the J option pane in there, although it's most common to use it embedded with other GUI programs as opposed to embedded with text-based programs. So I'm going to add one other thing just so you can see the difference between this. I had said you can add null or you can add this. So I'm actually going to go up into the control panel for a moment and into our redraw button listener, and I'm going to add is it? Okay, so I'll do it when we click the fill box. I just want to show you the difference between those two options. What's the redraw button called? Redraw button. Okay, so if the event.getSource equals our redraw button. So I want to actually just show you what the pop-up looks like. So I'm just going to show a message, starting with putting it over null. So this box will be shown anytime the user clicks redraw, okay, because I've put that inside the redraw handler. So this is what it looks like when the parent component is null. So if I click redraw, you'll notice the message shows up in the middle of my screen. Even though the panel's over up to the top left, the message box is in the middle. If I make this which is the current panel, the current object, the current component, and click redraw, it shows up. Oops, actually I need, not this. Shoot, I actually need, hang on one second. Sorry about that. I actually want it to be, because this of course is the listener class, I actually want it to be the drawing panel. So sorry, let's show that. Okay. Redraw. Notice that now the message shows up centered over the drawing panel. So that's essentially the difference, is if you have an existing GUI program, if you send in the parent component as this or as a panel or something like that, it'll show up, the J option pane pop-up window will show up on top of that window. And if you send it in as null, it'll show up centered in the middle part of your screen. So it just depends what you want your program, how you want it to look. But that's the difference between sending in null and sending in this. So we're going to actually finish up this section with just some last additions to our troubleshooting checklist. So these ones in blue are the new ones we've added this time. So remember that we want to register or listen to every button or panel. So if we have buttons, we register or listen to them. But if we're talking about mouse events or perhaps timer events, we register our listener to the panel. We also need to make sure it's the right listener. So that's talking about mouse versus mouse motion. And then going back to what we talked about with timer events, we need to make sure we start that timer. So make sure you include that line to start the timer. So this is our final troubleshooting checklist, the final list. Again, this is a list of things that if you've written your program, maybe you've been testing it all along, which is great. Maybe you haven't been, which you should be. But either way, let's say you write the program and it looks great and you get to the end and just nothing is working and you can't quite seem to figure out why. This is the list of things to run through. Check these things first. And it's a good chance that one of these errors, which are all errors that are easy to make and really hard to track down. Okay, so that's why I give you this list, because this is a good place to start, to go through, run through this checklist, figure out, is any of these things the source of my problem? If it is, great. Of course, if you get all the way to the end of the checklist and your program's still not working, then you go out, call in for backup. But this is a good first place to start. Run through this list, make sure all these things are working. And at that point on, happy GUIing.